من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم.
Assalamualaikum. We're going to be getting started, so if you can please take a seat. Jazakallah khair.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. نوينا تعلم وتعليم وتذكر وتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله ودعاء إلى الهدى ودلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته قربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome everyone to our sixth and final meeting together. Tonight I'm gonna freestyle it tonight. We're not gonna go through slides, and I do want to kind of make time to open up for any kind of questions or really just conversation around not just reading in rings, but reading the Quran in general. What I'd like to do tonight is maybe revisit some of what we've covered over the past 5 weeks, and then propose an order of operations on how to reflect on the Quran in an impactful way that doesn't require you to become a historian or an expert on hadith sciences. I want this to be like the layman's approach to understanding the Quran. But I'm calling it an order of operations for now. But I do want to make time for folks to ask questions of any kind, within reason. This isn't an AMA, but I do want to open it up a bit. So if you have questions about what we've been talking about with the rings, keep those in mind. Please do ask them if you have questions or reflections that you want to share about on how to interpret or how to reflect on the Quran, or even things controversial. Please, now's the time to kind of air them out. Okay, so getting back to the beginning, ring composition is just the term that we use to describe the pattern or the coherence of the Quran, and that is a coherence that occurs at the level of the entire Quran. It occurs at a surah level, and it occurs even at an ayah level, which we saw in the beginning with Ayatul Kursi, where the beginning of the ayah mirrors the end of the ayah, and then the second with the second to the last, and the third with the third to the last. We see this similar patterns like this. Now, we call it a ring. In that case, that would be a ring. But we see other types of parallelisms in other surahs, where it, instead of being A, B, C, D, C, B, A, it would be A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C. You with me? Does that make sense what I'm talking about? Right. And now it's not always going to be at the ayah level, right? You go ayah 1, ayah 2, ayah 3. Sometimes, usually, it'll just be like at a thematic level or an episodic level. It's called episodic reading, where you're reading, well, any passage of any text, but specifically with the Quran, and it will kind of change tone, change its voice, change the audience. Excuse me, as we've seen in Surah Rahman, it's initially speaking to human beings, and then it starts speaking to human beings and the jinn, and then it goes back to speaking to the human beings, and then believers and disbelievers, right? So you'll see these episodes all throughout the Quran, and they usually come as a unit, okay? And then when you move on to the next unit, it will sometimes be a slightly different, or if not a very different, theme or episode entirely. that's a good indication that you're in the middle of a ring or a parallelism. So it means keep in mind what you've just read and prepare to revisit later in the surah. It's very common that you'll experience that. Now, before we go into some of the details around the order of operations, just to again recap here, and I want to give you some resources too. I'm not going to use slides today. I'm feeling kind of lazy, but I'll be sure to share that with the organizers of Siraat, so that if you don't remember what I'm telling you, then maybe you can go and follow the links that are interesting to you. The first reference that I gave in the first lecture was by a professor, Mary Douglas. She was a professor in the UK. She died a few years ago, but her famous article, and apparently it was really controversial at the time. I didn't realize that. It's back in 2010, I believe, she published it, called "Thinking in Circles." So there's the first kind of resource for you if you're interested in this as a topic. Thinking in circles, and she applied this ring analysis, if you will, to passages in the Bible because it occurs frequently in the Hebrew Bible, uh, um, perhaps in some of the New Testament. I can't verify any of that, but I myself I've read passages from the Hebrew Bible and confirmed that they are in fact episodic or being structured. So that's Mary Douglas. It's a very good essay. She goes through how this composition, I don't want to call it a style, but for lack of a better word, this composition style, it's found in all kinds of literature. This was the go-to composition style of, say, medieval and like early medieval literature in many, many places of the world. So frequent and so ubiquitous it is that it would be a very tough argument to make that someone borrowed from someone else and that this was originated somewhere, and all of the literatures out there that used this methodology or this structuring, that they somehow had a lineage of uh, borrowing or copying it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like everybody does this, and it's almost and what's interesting is there's a very famous linguist named Roman Jakobson, a very famous Russian linguist from in the early 20th, late 19th century, and he talks about this as well. And he says this is almost a genetic propensity that we have to tell stories, to recount events of any kind in a very cyclical fashion. That there's something innate about the structure of it that helps us remember it, but also kind of to convey a deeper meaning of what we're saying. So there's another resource. He doesn't go into it too much, but he has a very strong opinion about this, and I can see the merit in that. That it is perhaps a human, an innately human propensity. That it's not something that was just borrowed from someone else and they all copy pasted. Another good resource is Raymond Farron's book. I think it's called Quranic Structure. Anyway, if you Google his name, Raymond Farron, Farrin, you'll find his book. It's a nice big yellow book. It's very well structured, very well written. That's a great resource as well. And then there's probably my favorite is Michael Kuipers. I think I'm saying his name right. Cuypers, and he's actually a friar in Belgium or something. And he has a couple books on this. One of them is called Semitic Rhetoric. It's interesting that he felt that this was something that was um, perhaps unique to the Semitic tribes in their, the Semitic peoples historically have been the Ahl Kitab, in fact, because of their, one, they invented the alphabet, two, writing and literature was a very early, I guess, technology, if you will, that they had invented. But he called it Semitic rhetoric because he found it in much of the scriptures, which was the dominant type of writing. I don't want to say literature because scripture is not literature, but it was the dominant form of writing was in scripture. So he just called it Semitic rhetoric. Then, after Michael Kuipers, we could say from the classical tradition. I hesitate to give you these references because one, it's all in Arabic, and it's pretty dense reading. For those of you who do read it in Arabic, I can give you some folks like al-Baqalani and al-Razi, Fakhruddin al-Razi talks about it as well. But they called it something else. They called it tanasub or ilm al-munasaba. But when we get into the late 19th, 20th century, we have scholars like al-Farahi, Hamiduddin al-Farahi, who's really just a genius. I was reading his one of his tafsirs just a couple nights ago. The guy is really brilliant. I mean, even if you read him just for anything, I mean, he's brilliant. Very strong opinions about some things too. And then his student, Amin al-Islahi, is probably the most, I guess, his Tadabburi Quran is probably the most robust example of authorship or scholarship around this what they call nazm or coherence of the Quran. But probably the best resource for you, and I'm going to plug this now for this brother Munir. He has a website called Heavenly Order, and if you recall, for those of you who were here, who's for those of you, it's your first night. who's your first night? All right. Okay. You didn't watch it online either? Okay. So, so go to Heavenly Order. Look for Heavenly Order online. It says Substacks. You can just look Heavenly Order Substack.com. It's brilliant. He goes into great detail about literally not every surah, but so many surahs. Very nice table of contents. You can click through them and see each surah. And he's turning this into a book. I want to endorse him again. You know, really read read his site, give him feedback, motivate him, and encourage him to complete that book that I told him I'm desperately waiting for because I'm tired of doing the ring analysis on my own. I want someone else to do it so I can just kind of be like, oh yeah, that looks right. Okay, cool. Anyway, so it's a wonderful effort that he's making there. Unfortunately, we weren't able to bring him on tonight we couldn't set up the technology. But maybe some night we'll bring him, inshallah, or we can tell him to come up from Southern California to give a lecture or something on the Status's project. I know he works with. He mentioned he's worked with Nu'man Ali Khan and Suhaib Saeed, another scholar out of Oxford. He's an Azhari, very well respected young scholar. So anyway, these are some of the resources that you have at your disposal now. I mean, you could probably just be done with Heavenly Order and not move on to others. Okay, so why do we do what we do? Why am I interested in ring composition? Yes, it's mesmerizing. Yes, it's brilliant, and it's a beautiful glass bottle, very well perfected in its means of delivery to us. But I want to read the message in the bottle, and the ring composition facilitates a deeper, more meaningful, more impactful understanding, especially when it comes to difficult passages, or I would say, dare I say, problematic passages that may not settle with you with maybe a modern, postmodern lens of reading the Quran and say, hey, this doesn't actually fit with our times. Well, if you read it within this ring composition, it sometimes helps to get a better contextualization of what's actually being said. So that's it there. I really want to emphasize that the structure is beautiful and amazing, but you should use it to your advantage. If you're interested in it as a topic unto itself, I mean, for sure I'm happy to have conversations about this, but I really do want to impress upon you the importance of using this, not just looking at it, but taking it as a tool of your own and adopting it as you read. Okay? The question sometimes arises, well, why didn't early scholars talk about this? Well, there's a couple things. One, Early on, it was not necessary. In fact, that was not what they were interested in. You got to remember, these were people, the Sahaba and the Tabi'in, they were literally expecting the world to end like within their lifetime. We have many accounts of this. They were like, yeah, no, this is, the end is near. We need to come closer to Allah. We need to make tawbah. We need to get our act right. The subsequent generation, the generation of ulama that emerge out of that, they're busy with many issues at hand. One, establishing grounds for fiqh, interpreting or understanding the Quran for its, for its very intimate personal meanings. But then by, say, like the 3rd century after Hijrah is when you start to see this field emerge. Now you're getting into people who are more intellectual. It's almost a luxury to talk about this. It's not like an immediate need. You know what I mean? Like my wife calls this a vanity study. It's like, yeah, it's not, like people starving in Gaza aren't concerned about ring composition. Yes, that's true. So if you have the leisure and the luxury to read the Quran in rings, it's kind of a leisure. But that being said, early scholars did read about it, like Baqalani, or they did talk about it, but not to the level of specialization and intricacies that we have available to us today. Why that is, wallahu a'lam. But I know, or I trust that they understood this implicitly. And my theory, along with Al-Farahi, he says the same. They lived and breathed the Quran. So for them to talk about the structure would be like us talking about the guardrails on a highway in a beautiful, countryside. Like you're not going to talk about the guardrails. You're not going to talk about. You're going to express the beauty of what you're witnessing. So, and I believe in that. I really believe that they absolutely understood this better than I did, and any of us. They were witness to it immediately, and they didn't have to ponder it. For us, we have to ponder it and we have to talk about it because it is foreign to us. Because in the modern era, we don't read that way. We don't write that way. And when we see someone read or write that way, it is impressive to us. It is kind of confusing in a way. Like, wait, and we see this when there are Muslim scholars who even say, "Oh, the Quran is disjointed." Well, it's not disjointed at all if you read it episodically, if you read it in these structures, and it makes this amazing tapestry of ayat and surahs tied together. So I wanted to leave it at that. That is why we read in rings. If anybody has any questions or thoughts on it, and if not, I can move on to maybe an order of operations discussion. Yeah.
When we read it in rings, most of us are going to be using translations.
Mhm.
How do we engage with ring theory? We don't necessarily know which translation is going to kind of scratch that itch, if you will.
That's the beauty of it. You don't really, I don't want to say you don't need the Arabic for it. I am an Arabic professor, an Arabic linguist. Come take my Arabic class. I live and breathe it. But in order to be able to read like the general meaning of the Quran as a whole, that's what translations are for. That's what commentaries are for, is to help guide you. So you will still, if I understand the question correctly, will I still be able to, I guess, recognize these rings or whatever? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You'll know when the subject changes. You may not know the intricacies of what some word means or the grammar or something, or maybe there's a translation that's just kind of, I don't know, weird, but they're not that weird. I mean, they're still in the same ballpark. So nonetheless, in fact, that's one way you can actually, when you read it episodically, when you read it in rings, um, it kind of raises a red flag around things that don't fall into the pattern. Like, wait, what? That doesn't. What's going on here? And I won't go into examples, but some of them are quite controversial, which you and I discussed last week. And you think it should be something else. Well, you dig further and you find out it is actually something else. They translated it in a weird way, or they used a wrong word for it. So ring composition or reading in rings is actually one. It's very doable in in a language other than Arabic when you're reading the Quran or the meaning of the Quran. But also it can kind of um, highlight erroneous translations. Yeah. Does that get at your question? Okay, perfect. Anyone else? No? Who's nervous about trying to read this way? Nobody? Who's going to read this way? Okay, I see some heads nodding, some nodding because they're falling asleep. Um, shout out to Chai Guy. Thank you for the chai. Just want to give that out. Give him a little plug. So, an order of operations. What does this mean now? This all falls under the rubric of, or under the category of what's called Tafsir al-Qur'an bil-Qur'an. That is, reading the Quran with the Quran as its own commentary or explanation of itself. Okay? And I tried to walk you through Surah Ar-Rahman before, how it does this. It's talking about the earth, plants and grains in this world, and then it starts talking about Jannah in a very parallel fashion. So this is a way that the Quran explains itself. Another thing that we do when we're doing like Tafsir al-Qur'an bil-Qur'an is reading reading with the understanding that it's not just meaning that's being imparted to us or being conveyed to us, but its function as well. And what do I mean by that? Usually when you read, say, a story of Musa alayhi salam and Fir'aun, and it says, هل أتاك حديث موسى إذ ناداه ربه بالوادي المقدس طوى اذهب إلى فرعون إنه طغى. That is, did you not hear about the story of Musa when when his Lord called him in the sacred valley? Go to Pharaoh, right? He is a transgressor, something to that effect. The function here, we understand the meaning there. You know, Musa is a Nabi, and Fir'aun is a tyrant, and Musa is trying to give him da'wah, right? One function of that, though, well, how do you get at the function? You say, well, not just what is my Lord saying, but why is he telling me this story? Right? Is it a history lesson? A lot of people, they read it as a history lesson, and that's fine, okay. But it's something much more intimate, something much more impactful. And to read this functionally would be to say, my Lord is telling me this story not because I'm Musa, but because I'm Fir'aun. You understand? And a lot of times we read it to say, oh, I'm Musa. Yeah. Where is a Fir'aun that I can go give da'wah to? Go stand on the corner in Santa Cruz and argue with him. But so often we miss this very important point. The Quran is not here to tell you you're a prophet. He's not here to tell you you are on right guidance. He's here to warn you, don't fall off the path. Don't be seduced by your mini Fir'aun in you. You know, don't become like Fir'aun. When the Nabi comes to you, when the Risala comes to you, when the Huda comes to you, don't become arrogant, right? Be very cautious. Somebody's coming to you with guidance about humility, which was what Musa's message was to him. And you know, the real irony is when people feel that they are the Musa, and by feeling that they are the Musa, they are actually becoming the Fir'aun there. Oh, I'm righteous already. I don't need your guidance. Misses the entire point of the humility that's being imparted in this story. Because ultimately that's what he was punished for. You know that? Fir'aun wasn't necessarily punished because he was a tyrant, like abusive to the people or something. He was punished because of his arrogance, the extreme arrogance, right? So anyway, this would be a way of reading the Quran for its function. That is, what is it trying to tell me? It's trying to warn me about something. It's not simply a semantic relay. It's also trying to get me to do something. And I'm interested in this field because it's, or this topic because it's a field of linguistics in pragmatics called speech act theory. Has anybody ever heard of speech act theory? How there are different speech acts. Have I brought this up before? I can't remember. I talk a lot, and I talk about this a lot. Yeah. Because of that exact passage, actually, when it follows that he's made a nakala, he's made an example out of him because of his response. حشر فنادى فقال أنا ربكم الأعلى فأخذه الله نكال الآخرة والأولى. That is, he says, Fir'aun says, I am your Lord Most High. And then immediately, فأخذه الله. Then Allah takes him, makes an example out of him. Right? So that's how we know. It wasn't like, oh, he went and punished and brutalized the people. He didn't, oh, he tried to kill Musa. No, he says, I am your Lord Most High. Oh yeah, speech act theory. This is a complete tangent, but it's such a fascinating way to read the Quran now. Speech act theory says that basically there are 5 ways, well, 5 total actually, 5 things that you can do with language. And this originated in a book called Doing Stuff with Words. I think that's what it was called, by John Austin. And then later by John Searle. Doing things with words, doing stuff with words, something like that. And basically, so like in the story of Musa and Fir'aun, what function is that doing? It's a warning, right? It's telling you about the speaker's, maybe not intent, but the speaker's commitment to some future act, right? That's what a warning is, or a promise. Another one is when the speaker is expressing their emotion or their feelings about something, right? But one of the most interesting, I won't go into all of them, but one of the most interesting things about speech act theory, which is related to what we're talking about tonight, I promise, is a category of speech acts that actually is unlike other categories. And that is when a judge slams his gavel and says, you are guilty or you are innocent. That utterance itself changes reality, at least the social reality, right? A police officer, if he says you're under arrest, he doesn't need handcuffs. He's already told you you're under arrest. And if you walk away, now you are evading his arrest. Even though he didn't put you in any kind of custody or anything, it's just his words themselves are now binding. It's kind of a social contract that we have. When you name someone, when you name a child, when you name a pet, when you name a ship, when you name a building or a room, that's also a speech act. It's changing something about the reality. Lots of examples of this. It's kind of endless. And then there's like, what do you call them? Indirect speech acts. Like if I say, this is really funny. If I say, wow, it's pretty warm in here, right? What does that mean? If I say, oh, it's pretty warm in here, what am I doing with that? There's a pattern to this, by the way. The men will usually say, oh yeah, he's just kind of complaining about how warm it is. But the women will often say, I should go open a window. It's much more sympathetic, much more emotionally intelligent than us. But that's typical. Like if I say, oh, it's warm in here, you might interpret that as an indirect speech act, as a command. Oh, I should go open the window. Like he's being subtle, right? So there's lots of things that we do with speech acts, and why this is relevant, because this is another way of reading the Quran Tafsir al-Qur'an bil-Qur'an. And this was something that I learned from my teacher, Dr. Yamina Buganaya, where she says, when the Qur'an tells you that the heavens and the earth were built, it is that exact ayah that built the heavens and the earth. That when Allah speaks, it is a command. It brings into reality something that was not existing before. Kun fayakun. The speech of Allah creates. That's exactly what that type of speech act is. It creates a reality. I say you're under arrest. Now I can't say you're under arrest because I don't have the authority to arrest you, but a police officer could say that. Well, Allah has the authority to bring things into existence from nothing. And so when He says that the heavens and the earth, in the Quran, when the Quran says that, it is that utterance that creates the reality that it's describing. That's extraordinary. It means when you read Tabbat yada abi lahabim wa tabb, Abu Lahab, famously, the ayah is the surahs about Abu Lahab. It says, may his hands perish for his mistreatment of the Prophet and his wife as well. The Quran, Allah's speech, is pre-eternal. So it said that before He even did that. So it was basically condemning him to Jahannam. The utterance itself created that reality. So when you're reading the Quran this way, well, it's really hard to move beyond a single ayah without almost fainting. It's very, very deep. That Allah's speech is eternal. And when it says kun fayakun, it comes into existence. When He's describing some event between Musa and Fir'aun, it is that utterance that brought it into reality. Okay? Another thing that we do with Tafsir al-Qur'an bil-Qur'an is understanding these oath verses, as I had mentioned. If you recall, for those of you who came before we started the ring structure discussions, I kind of walked you through how to read oaths, the so-called oaths in the Quran. وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى, and so on and so forth. These oaths, that to read these, understanding that they are witnesses to a claim that the Quran is about to make. And that is, these witnesses, the sun, the moon, the mountain, whatever, these witnesses, they are giving some testimony that you need to listen to. And that testimony is evidence for the claim that the Quran is trying to convince you of. The Quran is demanding from you critical thinking, right? It's demanding of you critical thinking and critical reading. Has anyone ever heard of the book, How to Read a Book? I see some heads pop up. You've heard of it? Who's heard of it? Who's heard of it? Who's read it? MashaAllah, I love you guys. So How to Read a Book, you need to read this. One of my biggest regrets is I did not read this until I was in graduate school. If I had read this before I went into college, I'd be a lot smarter. I would have understood a lot more. I would have argued less, knowing that I was not equipped to argue with the author about whatever claims he was making. How to Read a Book. And don't do yourself a favor. Don't ask ChatGPT to summarize this. All right? It's how to read a book, not how to ask ChatGPT to summarize a book. All right? If you go to the gym and you're like, oh, my goal is to, bench press this much weight, you have to do that every day and you get a little stronger and stronger and stronger. If you start out trying to bench press 400 pounds, it's not going to happen. But that doesn't mean like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to have my personal trainer lift the bar for me. No. You didn't actually do the work. That's the same thing when you ask ChatGPT, right? Which I use and abuse ChatGPT. All of them, I use and abuse them, but not for my thinking. Not for my thinking. I'll debate it. I'll argue with it and try to convince it that Israel's an apartheid state, this kind of stuff, really try to corner him. Like, aha, got you. I'm going to screenshot it and share it on Twitter. But I don't let it do my thinking for me. So don't let it do your thinking for you. Don't let it hijack your thinking. How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler. It's a very, very good book. Explains basically how to suspend your opinion on things. That is very hard. You read something for the first time, or you hear something for the first time, you have like a gut instinct to respond. Like, oh, that's nonsense, right? Or, oh, that's amazing. Like, whoa, 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 whoa. Before you agree or disagree, you got to read more. You got to capture all of the context. Make sure that the author has explained it logically and exhausted the discussion before you chime in, right? So having sabr, suspending your, sabr means, sabr meant, classically it means to hold the reins of your horse. It means to restrain, hold your horses, literally. Hold your horses, man. Have sabr when you're reading. Don't jump to conclusions. Ah, this guy, he's mulhid. Be patient. Bid'ah, just calm down. You may not have the full context of something. So, how to read a book. That's a very important tool in your toolkit now on how to read critically. I see a hand up. Okay, cool. Okay, any questions? No, good. How am I doing on time? Okay, good. I threw caution to the wind. Don't even have a screen in front of me or a watch or anything. So, how to read the Quran? Usually, well, how do you normally read the Quran? Hmm? Okay, sequentially. In English or Turkish or Arabic? Every way possible? Okay, okay. Who reads and understands what they're reading? I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I mean it like, who reads to understand the Quran? I mean, obviously we all read it maybe out of devotion. We're reading it to learn to memorize it and recite it. But I mean, when you're reading it with actual comprehension, do people do that? I hope people do that. Okay. And you do it in maybe in English, maybe in Arabic, uh, preferably Arabic. If you can't, please sign up for my class. I keep dropping that. I'm going to continue. We're going to start over, by the way, in September. So we'll go back to level 1 for those who are interested. But when you're reading for comprehension, what do you do when you come to say something that you kind of scratch your head for a minute, like, what's going on here? Or which is everywhere. Basically, every ayah is like that for me, right? When it's talking to you about the day of judgment or something, what do you do? I like that. She looks at other translations. Okay, that's good. I actually make it a habit of that. It's like I consider it a halaqa. Like I'll sit there, I'll put out all these translations, all these tafsirs, right? And we're just having a conversation. Like, no, I don't agree. That's a good one, right? You have that liberty. In fact, you should do that. Don't feel that you have to be beholden to what, some famous tafsir says. He probably does know more than you, or she knows more than you. But it doesn't mean that you have to just accept that blindly. No, God forbid. You need to be convinced. You need to be persuaded. And it's their responsibility to persuade you. Now, read critically, read intelligent. Maybe you did not understand what the tafsir was explaining, but you read it exhaustively, you look at it from different angles, and you entertain other translations. You might come to realize, oh yeah, Fakhruddin Razi, he was right. Yeah, it was kind of crazy, but I do agree. This is what it means. Okay? This is often the case. I would say this though. It's very standard, by the way, that I'm stuck. I'm going to go and see what someone else says. I'm guilty of this too. I do this. That's not the best way to do that, in my opinion. That's there as a resource to go and read other tafsirs. But the first thing that if I'm feeling like I'm not being lazy, well, I reread it. And I reread not just the ayah, I read the entire surah if I can. That's the main context. A lot of times people will kind of decontextualize it and say, I'm going to go and read the Asbab al-Nuzul. I need to understand what was happening on the ground in the life of the Prophet ﷺ when that happened. Here's the issue with that, and I've said this before. You know, the Quran is what we call mutawatir lafdi. That is, every word has been uttered in that order and heard by so many people and transmitted by so many people at every generation that it is impossible for it to be either an accident or a corruption. Some say that we can count on one hand the number of mutawatir lafzi hadiths we have. It doesn't mean they're not reliable. They're very reliable. These people dedicated their lives painstakingly to study the strength of certain narrations, but they're not mutawatir lafzi. Lafzi means word for word, verbatim. Okay? You can count that on one hand, what most ulama say. Now, if you want to say something is mutawatir ma'ani, like it's in its meaning, there's quite a few more. 100. Imam Suyuti has a book of 100 or so. I think that's too convenient of a number, too convenient of a round. It's probably like 135 or something, I don't know. But it's not that many. Now, why am I bringing that up? It's not to discredit, or neuter any of the hadiths or muhaddithin, the work they do, but rather to say you can't take something that is ahad and interpret it to something that is mutawatir. It just doesn't make sense. Mutawatir is always going to be the stronger. Okay, it's always going to be. It's like it's so common. It's such a powerful. It's so powerfully reliable. Okay, that to subordinate to something that has been transmitted by one person, it just doesn't make sense. It's kind of top heavy. Yeah. Yes. You hear his question? I think he was being sly when he said it. Were the dictionaries at that time mutawatir? Yes. Not because of the transmission of the dictionary, but because of the possibility for people to discredit it or to deny it and say, no, this isn't authentic. This isn't how we use the word, right? So we have an abundance of confirmation about the meaning of words as recorded very, very early on by lots of scholars who did this, lots of what we call lexicographers. All right, so that brings me to another point. The other thing that I'll do is if I'm stuck, I turn to the dictionary because I want to understand the words. But I would say that's still a secondary step. The first thing that I need to do is understand the entire surah, or at least the episode, okay? Because sometimes you'll come across an ayah that is very difficult to interpret, but when you read it in its context, it becomes much easier. Okay, and this is actually a principle that we teach like in second language acquisition, like when we're teaching foreign languages. Sometimes you give the learner more than what they can handle, and from all of that extra context, they will be able to understand whatever it is that they're missing. Does that make sense? We do it in my Arabic class all the time, my Quran class. We'll come across some word. Oh, I don't recognize the word. Okay, read the entire surah from the ayah. You'll be able to understand the meaning of that. The same thing applies when you're doing that with ayat or even entire episodes. You read it in its context. And that's what the ring composition is so valuable for, because it helps you kind of anchor it in a deeper context. Okay. So from there, I typically, if I'm reading something, God, I'm really hesitating. I want to give you guys an example, but it's going to open up a whole lot more questions. When I'm reading an ayah and I struggle to understand it, I resist the temptation to go read what someone else has thought about it. I force myself to do the rereading, the rereading, the rereading. I'll go look up any words that maybe I'm misunderstanding. Maybe it's got a different meaning that I didn't notice before. For example, the example I gave, يخرج من بين الصلب والترائب, the ayah in Surah al-Tariq, where it says, let mankind look at that which from whence he came, right? فَلْيَنْظُرُ الْإِنسَانُ مِمَّا خُلِقَ مِن مَّاءٍ دَافِقٍ. He came from an ejected fluid, ejected water, literally gushing water. يخرج من بين الصلب والترائب, that exited from between the ribs and between the backbone and the ribs, right? For years, Orientalists capitalized on that and said, look how foolish this is. Obviously, the man's fluid does not come from between the backbone and the ribs. They didn't understand biology. You know, their God is ignorant of human biology, blah, blah, blah. They love that. They love that. Until you read it more closely and you realize, oh, Ma'at dafiq is not anything necessarily to do with a specific type of fluid. It just means rushing water. It makes sense now that between the backbone and the ribs, or between the loins and the ribs, that's talking about the water of the womb, right? Regardless of what any mufassir says. And that's one of the dangers, I don't want to say dangers, but one of the things you have to kind of caution yourself against, or be aware of. You want to first read it unadulterated before you start letting other people's opinions influence you. Because it's very easy just to say, well, I mean, I'm no Ibn Kathir, so he must be right. I'm just going to take what he says, right? And then you just go about your lives and you never revisit it. Until one day it hits you, you say, this doesn't say that at all. Maybe there is somebody in the tradition who's already talked about it, and that's very often the case. So when you go to your favorite tafsir or your favorite translator, remember they are one out of tens of thousands that were written, that were preserved, I should say. Probably hundreds of thousands that were written that we don't have access to. It's often somebody's tent in Mauritania or something. Nobody knows where it is, but it's there. All right. The question? Okay. Anyway, so my point being that do the lifting yourself, do the reading yourself. If you're stuck, reread it, reread it, reread it. Right? Then, if you have exhausted all your resources, you go and you look at Tafsir, see what they've said. But don't just look at just one. There are a couple good translations out there that list multiple tafsir. One of them is Muhammad Asad. It's not an easy read, and there are some complications with it, but he lists up to 13 or 14 other opinions on most of his translations. He'll say, Razi says this, Maturidi said that, and here's my opinion on that. So it's good to read that way. You're reading now with multiple voices to influence your opinion. All right, like you're willfully doing that now. Another one is the study Quran. Has anybody heard of the study Quran? Yeah, yeah. It's a good resource. You know, there are some complaints about it and some criticisms that are legitimate, but all in all, they cite up to, I think, 35 or 40 classical tafsir. It's very good for that. I read it for the footnotes more than I do the translation. Same thing with Asad. I read it more for the footnotes than the translation. And then, once I've exhausted all of that, I'll go to the Mawdu'i. I'll go to the, not the Mawdu'i, I'll go to the Ma'thuri. That is, the statements that were recorded from the early companions. Why do I save that for last? Because I have no way of confirming whether or not they actually said it. Right? What I can confirm is what's written in front of me. Right? What is structurally there, the intertextuality of it. So I try to stay in the text as much as possible. And then if I want the extra context, yeah, I'll go and see. Maybe there's some asbab nuzul. Maybe there's some commentary from early generations, from the tabi'in or something, and it's available there. But you are not expected to become a scholar to reflect on the Quran. You are not expected to become a historian. You are not expected to become an usuli, like understanding the principles of hadith and the principles of hadith science or Quran interpretation. That's way too much. I mean, I invite you to do it. Yeah, please go. We need more ulama. But don't let that, don't let the, what's the expression? Don't let perfection be the enemy of good, right? You don't need to be, I mean, yes, become an alim, but don't let that hinder you from reflecting and having a deep understanding of the Quran. And spot check yourself. I do this. I read something and I have an opinion on it. I'll share it with, I'll confide in someone. It's like, am I tripping? I'm tripping. Is this what it says? I said, no, that's what it says. Okay, good. I'm not crazy. There's two of us. And then I'll go find other people and ask them. They say, yeah, that resonates. Right? So staying in the text, letting the Quran interpret the Quran, okay? Relying on things like the structure of the Quran to guide you so you don't fall off the path. These are tools at your disposal. And this is not in any way to replace reading the Quran with a scholar or reading, you know, other tafsirs or hadiths about certain ayat. Those are all very, very important. But if you don't have the, I guess, the stomach to read all of those, at least read that same surah as much as you can. You'll be very, you'll be surprised how much you can actually understand just by revisiting it over and over again. Okay, are we doing on time? I know this is very high level, very general order of operations, but I just wanted to share that with you. And maybe some later evening, we can talk about, you know, maybe some of the sciences from hadith or sirah or something like this, if you're interested, inshallah. Yes. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I think you and I talked about this recently, even. What do you think about reading like other scriptures, right? The Israeliyat, they're called. And a lot of ulama did this. This is what Ibn Kathir was famous for or infamous for. A lot of people don't like his tafsir because he relies so heavily on Jewish and Christian scriptures. But it does add value. I will say this though, the bulk of the Quran is nothing like the Bible. The vast majority of the Quran is nothing like it, right? Yes, there are stories, but that's really the extent of it, right? The stories of prophets. But there's no Luqman in the Old Testament or in the New Testament, right? There's no Khidr. That's wild. I mean, Khidr's kind of a big deal. And he's not anywhere in any other world scripture. That's interesting. But let's say you do want to read something that is parallel in the, say, the Old Testament. You still have to be very, very careful. And I'll give you a perfect example. Does everybody know the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam in Surah Al-Baqarah, where he stands and he says, "Oh Allah, make me see or show me how you give life to the dead." Have we talked about this? Okay. Show me how you give life to the dead. And Allah says, don't you believe? And what does Abraham say? He said, oh, no, 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 I believe. This is just to put my heart at ease, right? And so then what does Allah tell him? Anybody know? Say that again. Send bird pieces, right? Send pieces of birds and do what with them? No, there's something else before calling them. What do you do? Yeah, put them on the mountains. And then what? Call them. How did he get the pieces? From a butcher? He killed them? He chopped them up? No, made like a brother of mine. He came to me one day, Ahmed, if you're watching, Jazakallah khair. He said, "Where in this ayah does it say Ibrahim chopped up the birds?" So let's open it up and look. Subhanallah, it's not there. There's no cutting, there's no chopping, there's no killing, there's no buying, slaughtered halal meat, from the international market. None of that. There's no mention of it. Oh, he sent me on a goose chase. I said, okay, fine. There goes my weekend. Now this is an itch that I have to scratch. So I go and read some of the Old Testament, and I find a very interesting parallel where Yahweh makes a deal with Ibrahim and says, I'm going to give you some land. We all know how this goes. And then in response, Ibrahim starts cutting up some animals, like as an offering. Some pigeons, a goat, something else. I don't remember what it was. Gives him basically a meat platter in response for this real estate deal. Very strange. So that to me is probably the source of this, what I consider a misinterpretation or a misreading of this ayah. And why do I say that? Because if you know the Arabic here, the word for birds, what's the word for bird? What is a bird in Arabic? Don't say asfur. Huh? Ta'ir, yeah. And for birds, طيور. طيور. There's another plural. طير? Yeah, and what does it say in the Quran? طير. طير doesn't just mean birds. Like there are different types of plurals in Arabic. And this is why you got to take my class. You're going to get in a lot of trouble. This is not like a bunch of individual birds. These are like groups of birds, like flocks of birds or birds of a feather. Why is that important? Well, I'm not going to say it's unreasonable that Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam would slaughter thousands of birds or something and offer that up, but that doesn't make any sense. No, what he was doing was homing. What is homing? When you take birds, you turn them to you, meaning you pet them, you get them to like you, become attached to you. You train them, you send them out, and you call them back. This is a case where somebody read the Old Testament and said, this must be about chopping up some birds. But there's no cutting of birds going on. There's no killing of birds going on. What is going on is a homing of flocks of birds, which is very common. It's common even till today, right? So this is an example of where relying on, where keeping it real goes wrong. Where reading the Torah or the Injil can influence you negatively. It will bias your reading. So stay truthful to the text, read it closely. You probably did not understand the word that was used. Or you read a translation and, the translation led you astray. Yeah? Okay, she's giving me the signal. She said we have 10 more hours. Cool. Any other questions? Any thoughts? Yes, sir. I did not plug him to do that. That's cool. It'll be shared out in August, right? We're reading Surat Yusuf right now, and it's going well. I think it's going well. Wouldn't you say it's going well? Yeah, it's going well. We'll be wrapping that up in about 4 or 5 weeks. So I'm going to give myself a 2-week break. and then I'll reteach it in September. There's lots of great programs online, by the way, lots of great programs out there. But what I will say that I do that I think is perhaps unique is I make you do the reading. You know, I make you interpret and understand, and then I just kind of correct you where you go wrong. Right? I don't dictate to you. I'm more of a guide on the side than a sage on the stage. Yeah, and it's a great time. It's a great time. You learn a lot. Any other questions? None? Nobody has any issues with anything that I've said tonight? Yeah, it's wrong. Now go read Abdul Halim. Abdul Halim, his translation, he gets it right. Because he's a linguist. And always rely on a linguist to do the translations for you. Yes, sir. Where does that saying come? Did you just come up with that saying? There is a saying in my head that only one interpretation is correct. All right. I know Imam al-Farahi says this. Only one interpretation is correct. I don't want to tell you my answer, but I have to be honest. I believe that to be true. I do. I'm a very flexible person. I'm like, yeah, bring it. Let's hear it. You know, I'll entertain all kinds of interpretations. Yeah, okay, yeah, maybe not. No, that's definitely wrong. You know, we'll try and see which is the strongest opinion. And so this is the way the ulama historically have been. Is like we're not going to say any of them are wrong. You know, we're going to say some of them are wrong, but we will entertain multiple and say it is possible. It is possible. Wallahu a'lam. Right? And they have this. You know, it's a humility that they come with. Right? Because you want to be careful with this. But do I know which meaning is the actual correct one? No. But I believe that Allah has a meaning, a specific meaning, that is so deep that maybe it captures all of those things. Right? Like a meme. You ever see a meme? Memes have layers of meanings to it. That's what makes a meme a meme. So that's what makes them so fun, right? Not to say the Quran is like a meme, astaghfirullah, but to say that there are layers of the meaning, and we know that there are hadiths that talk about this. That there are levels, there are 7 depths or 7 layers to an ayah. Yes. Yeah. That it, in other words, it could not be, and this is true. When you read a translation, like Bayan, for example, Allamahul Bayan. No one translation is going to get that right. You really do need to grab 4, 5, 6 meanings to capture the meaning of that one word, right? Multiple interpretations. It's all one interpretation, though. It's just that there's levels to it. Yeah. Okay. All right, I'll leave it at that. I won't bring up any more controversies, but inshallah, maybe at a future date we can talk about some of the more touchy topics. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربنا اغفر لنا وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. Ya Allah, please forgive us for any of our transgressions and make us among those who seek tawbah. Ya Allah, guide our community. Ya Allah, forgive our community. Ya Allah, make us those who are attached to your word and follow your Rasul. Ya Allah, please make our community a beacon for other communities. Ya Allah, we ask that you bless our brothers and sisters in Gaza and in the Congo and the Sudan and in any place where our brothers and sisters are currently suffering. Ya Allah, we feel their pain. Ya Allah, please emancipate these peoples. Ya Allah, give them their rights, give them their freedoms. And Ya Allah, please never let our love for them leave our hearts, and never let our hearts, never let the thought of them leave our minds. Inshallah, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم الصراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين.
Please clap it up for brother Professor Elijah Reynolds. Thank you, Professor, for the insightful sessions the past several weeks. Also, please support our vendors that are outside in the hallway. We have Chai Guy and Maham Streets. Try the chai. They also have a collaboration dessert, the chai tres leches. It's really good. It sounds yummy too. Inshallah, we will be having our next pathway series with Ustad Basil on why Islam is true. Keep an eye out for the flyer. Also, keep an eye out for the next few weeks for our bonfire social. Details coming soon. Maghrib prayer is between those doors. There's lots of new faces today, so say salam to someone new, make a new friend. Thank you guys for coming. See you guys next week, inshallah.